I'm Jessica Adams, 28 years old, and I always dreamed my father would walk me down the aisle on my wedding day. We were inseparable my whole life, from fishing trips to late-night talks. But 3 weeks before the biggest day of my life, Dad called to tell me he wouldn't be attending my wedding at all. My sister Amber, who's resented me since childhood, had organized a family reunion on the exact same day as my wedding, forcing everyone to choose sides. The look in my father's eyes when he chose her over me broke something inside that I'm still trying to repair. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, then you know this pain. Before I share my story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and if you can relate to family drama like this, hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this all unfolded and eventually led to healing I never thought possible. Growing up in our modest brick home in Fairfield, Ohio, I never could have imagined how complicated family relationships could become. Our family of 4 seemed normal from the outside. My father Robert worked as an electrical engineer, my mother Karen taught elementary school, and my sister Amber was 4 years older than me. We had a fenced backyard, a golden retriever named Sandy, and weekend barbecues in summer. Picture perfect, or so it seemed. The first signs of trouble appeared when I was around 5 years old. Amber was 9 then, already showing signs of the resentment that would shape our relationship for decades. I still remember the science fair project I worked on in 1st grade, a simple display about butterflies with painted egg carton caterpillars. I'd left it drying in the garage overnight, and the next morning found it mysteriously destroyed, paint smeared across my carefully written labels. When I cried to my parents, Amber claimed Sandy must have knocked it over, but the calculating look in her eyes told a different story. Jessica, don't be dramatic, my mother sighed, always seeking the path of least resistance. Amber will help you fix it before school. Amber did help, but made sure to whisper, nobody likes a tattletale, while gluing my project back together all wrong. That became a pattern. Amber would undermine me in ways that seemed accidental to our parents, while making sure I knew exactly what she was doing. By 3rd grade, the incidents escalated to social sabotage. Amber started telling other kids at school that I wet the bed or picked my nose when no one was looking. Small town schools meant everyone knew we were sisters, and her status as an older student gave her words weight. I'd walk into the lunchroom to whispers and stares, never quite understanding why making friends was so difficult. Through it all, my father became my refuge. Robert Adams was a quiet man who expressed love through shared activities rather than words. Every Sunday morning, he'd wake me before dawn with a gentle tap on my shoulder. "Ready to catch some fish, Jessie girl?" he'd whisper, and I'd scramble into my overalls and rubber boots. Those mornings on Parker Lake were sacred, just the 2 of us in a small aluminum boat, watching the mist rise off the water as the sun broke over the trees. "You've got a good eye," he'd say when I'd spot ripples on the water surface. "Patient too. That's rare in someone so young." His praise was sparse but meaningful, making each comment a treasure I'd turn over in my mind for days afterward. While I was forming this bond with Dad, Amber was growing closer to our mother. They shared a love of baking and crafting, often spending weekends making elaborate desserts or seasonal decorations for the house. I sometimes tried to join them, standing awkwardly at the kitchen counter as they executed well-practiced routines that clearly didn't include space for me. "Maybe you should go help your father in the garage," Mom would suggest after I'd accidentally spill flour or cut a pattern wrong. "This might not be your thing, honey." The division became clearer as we grew older. Dad and Jessica, Mom and Amber, 2 separate units within one household. My parents never meant to create this dynamic, but their natural inclinations and the path of least resistance led us there nonetheless. My 10th birthday marked a turning point. Dad had planned a special surprise, tickets to a Cincinnati Reds baseball game, something I'd been begging to attend. The morning of my birthday, I came downstairs to find him at the kitchen table, face grim. "I'm sorry, Jessie," he said, hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "Amber isn't feeling well. We'll have to postpone the game." I later overheard Amber talking on the phone with her friend, laughing about how she'd made herself throw up that morning just to ruin my birthday. That night, I cried silently in my bed, not from missing the baseball game, but from the realization that my sister actively wanted to hurt me. School became my sanctuary and salvation. I threw myself into academics and extracurricular activities, finding purpose in achievement rather than seeking Amber's approval. By middle school, I was consistently bringing home straight A's, winning spelling bees, and playing first-chair violin in the school orchestra. Each accomplishment seemed to drive the wedge between Amber and me deeper. "Not everyone can be perfect like Jessica," Amber would sneer when her report card showed CS and DS. My parents never compared us directly, but their reactions spoke volumes: pride for my achievements, concerned discussions behind closed doors about Amber's struggles. By high school, our paths had diverged significantly. I was taking advanced placement classes and leading the debate team, while Amber had found her place with a crowd known more for partying than studying. The distance between us had grown so vast that we could live in the same house yet go days barely acknowledging each other's existence. Through it all, I never stopped trying to bridge the gap. For Amber's 16th birthday, I saved up to buy her the leather jacket she'd been eyeing at the mall. Her response was telling: a suspicious look, followed by, "What do you want?" as though kindness between us was so foreign it must have an ulterior motive. The jacket disappeared into her closet, and I never saw her wear it once. Dad noticed these dynamics but seemed at a loss about how to fix them. "Your sister's just finding her way," he'd tell me during our fishing trips. "Some people take longer to figure things out. Don't take it personally." But even as he said this, I could see the worry lines deepening around his eyes, his shoulders carrying the weight of a fractured family. As graduation approached, I had long since learned to navigate life with a sister who seemed determined to see me fail. I built friendships with people who valued me, focused on goals that excited me, and accepted that Amber and I might never have the sisterly bond I'd once craved. What I never questioned, though, was my father's unwavering support, a certainty that would eventually be tested in ways I couldn't have imagined. When my acceptance letter from Northwestern University arrived, Dad hung it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like the state of Ohio. "First Adams to go to college," he announced at dinner, raising his glass of iced tea in a toast. Mom clapped enthusiastically while Amber pushed peas around her plate, face unreadable. Later that night, I found my acceptance letter crumpled in the trash can. I smoothed it out and returned it to its place on the fridge without mentioning the incident to anyone. By then, I had learned which battles were worth fighting. Moving 8 hours away to Chicago for college created a physical distance that, initially, seemed to improve things. Home visits during holidays were easier when they weren't preceded by weeks of daily friction. During my freshman year, I called home every Sunday night, primarily to talk to Dad about my classes and campus life. "The lake here reminds me of our fishing spot," I told him during one call, describing how Lake Michigan's vastness made me feel simultaneously small and full of possibilities. "Might have to come see it for myself," he replied, his smile audible through the phone line. "Maybe bring my fishing gear, though I doubt we'd catch much in those tourist-filled waters." Meanwhile, Amber had taken a job at Valley Insurance in our hometown, processing claims and apparently finding stability in the structured office environment. She started dating Tyler Mitchell, who had played football at our high school and now worked at his father's construction company. Their relationship moved quickly, engaged by Christmas of my sophomore year, married by spring break. I flew home for the wedding, of course. Standing beside Amber as a bridesmaid felt surreal, both of us playing parts in a performance of sisterly affection neither of us felt. Dad's eyes were wet when he walked Amber down the aisle, and for a brief moment, watching them, I felt a pang of something like jealousy, not of her marriage, but of that specific moment she was sharing with our father. "Beautiful ceremony," I told Amber at the reception, offering an olive branch. She scanned my simple navy blue dress with barely concealed disdain. "Thanks for not trying to outshine me for once," she replied, before turning to greet another guest. By the time I graduated with honors in marketing and communications, Amber was 7 months pregnant with her first child. I accepted a position with a digital marketing firm in Chicago, officially establishing my life away from Ohio. The distance made it easier to maintain the facade of normalcy in our family, interactions limited to holiday gatherings and occasional weekend visits. Christmas of that year proved particularly tense. Amber, uncomfortable in late pregnancy and confined to the couch, seemed to take personal offense at every conversation that didn't revolve around her impending motherhood. "So Jessica's been promoted already," Dad announced proudly over dinner, after I'd mentioned my new role managing client accounts. "Always knew you'd rise fast once they saw what you could do." "Must be nice to focus only on yourself," Amber muttered, hands resting on her swollen belly. "Some of us are creating human life instead of PowerPoint presentations." Mom quickly changed the subject to safer territory, asking about everyone's dessert preferences, while Dad shot me an apologetic glance across the table. That night, he came to my old bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed like he used to do when I was little. "Your sister's having a hard time," he said softly. "The pregnancy hasn't been easy." "I know, Dad," I replied, though what I wanted to say was that nothing had ever been easy with Amber, pregnant or not. "She'll come around," he continued, patting my hand. "Just keep being you. That's all I've ever asked." When my niece Lily was born in January, I sent an elaborate gift basket and took 3 days off work to help at their house. Amber was recovering from an emergency C-section, and I thought perhaps the vulnerable state might soften the edges between us. I cooked meals, did laundry, and tiptoed around their small rental house trying to make myself useful without being intrusive. On my last evening there, I was holding Lily while Amber napped, marveling at her tiny fingers and the perfect curve of her eyelashes. Tyler came in from his shower, saw us, and paused. "You know," he said quietly, "Amber worried you wouldn't come to help. Said you were probably too busy with your important job." "She's my sister," I replied simply. "And Lily's my niece." He nodded, seeming to understand something deeper than what my words conveyed. "Sometimes I think she doesn't know what to do with someone who keeps showing up despite everything." That visit marked a brief thaw in our relationship, but it didn't last. By the following Christmas, the old patterns had reasserted themselves. Amber brought Lily, now almost 1, to my parents' house decked out in a designer outfit. "It's the same brand Blue Ivy wears," she announced to everyone in the living room. "Tyler got a bonus." "She looks adorable," I said sincerely, offering the toddler a soft block from her toy bag. "Well, not everyone can afford nice things," Amber replied with a pointed look at my simple jeans and sweater, deliberately misinterpreting my comment as criticism. Later, as we washed dishes side by side in forced proximity, I tried again. "Lily's growing so fast." "She has your eyes." Amber scrubbed a pot with unnecessary force. "Must be disappointing to come home and find no one's impressed by your big city job anymore. Now I'm the one Dad brags about to his friends. His granddaughter is apparently more interesting than marketing metrics." I set down the plate I was drying, suddenly exhausted by the decades-long competition I'd never signed up for. "It's not a contest, Amber." "Easy for the winner to say," she shot back, then left me alone in the kitchen with a sink full of soapy water. The following spring, I accepted a position with a larger agency that would require relocation to New York City. The substantial salary increase and career advancement opportunities made it an easy professional decision, though I knew it meant seeing my family even less frequently. When I called to tell my parents the news, Dad's reaction surprised me. "New York," he repeated, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "That's so far, Jessie." "It's just a 2-hour flight, Dad," I reassured him. "I'll visit often, and you and Mom could come see me. I'll have a guest room." "Of course we will," he said, recovering his enthusiasm. "Your old man in the Big Apple. Who would have thought?" We established a new routine after my move, weekly Sunday phone calls and video chats where Dad would proudly wear his New York Yankees cap, a gift I'd sent, despite his lifelong Reds loyalty. For my 30th birthday, my parents made their first trip to visit me, Dad marveling at the subway system and the view from my apartment window. "You've built quite a life," he said, gazing out at the city lights. In that moment, I felt a tug of gratitude for the distance that allowed him to see me clearly, without Amber's shadow constantly falling between us. What I didn't realize then was how tenuous this new equilibrium would prove to be, or how quickly everything would change when I finally found someone I wanted to build a future with. The peace I'd constructed through geographic separation was about to be tested by the ultimate family milestone, a wedding that would force everyone to show their true priorities once and for all. The conference room at the Chicago Marriott was packed with marketing professionals from across the country when I first noticed him. Daniel Foster stood at the podium, presenting case studies on ethical digital marketing practices with a confidence that never crossed into arrogance. His dark-rimmed glasses kept sliding down his nose, and he'd absently push them back up mid-sentence, a human quirk in an otherwise polished presentation. During the networking hour afterward, I made my way over to introduce myself, professionally curious about his agency's approach to client privacy concerns. One conversation led to coffee the next morning before sessions began, which led to dinner that evening after the conference concluded. I live in New York, I mentioned over dessert, expecting this geographical challenge to temper whatever was developing between us. Funny coincidence, Daniel replied with a small smile. I'm opening our new office there next month. Temporary assignment that just might become permanent with the right incentives. His eyes held mine, making it clear I might be one of those incentives. Daniel was 32, 6 years into his role as creative director at his firm, and refreshingly straightforward about what he wanted, both professionally and personally. Within 3 months of that Chicago meeting, we were officially dating, and by 6 months, he had relocated permanently to New York, his apartment just 12 blocks from mine. What struck me most about Daniel was his emotional intelligence. On our 5th date, I found myself sharing the complicated dynamics of my family over Lebanese food in his barely furnished apartment, unpacking decades of history I typically kept private. So your sister has basically been competing with you since you were in diapers, but you're the only one who knows it's a competition, he clarified, thoughtfully breaking apart a piece of pita bread. I laughed despite myself. That's actually the most accurate summary I've ever heard. Unlike previous partners who had either minimized these tensions or suggested I simply cut contact with Amber, Daniel recognized the nuance of family bonds. It sounds exhausting, he said simply. And lonely, in a way, to be constantly misunderstood by someone who should know you best. His understanding became my safe harbor, a place where I didn't have to explain or justify my feelings. As our relationship deepened, I found myself rediscovering parts of me that had been submerged beneath years of careful navigation around Amber's sensitivities. A year and a half after we met, Daniel suggested a weekend getaway to upstate New York. Just to disconnect, he said casually, though the slight tremor in his voice suggested other plans. We drove to a lakeside cabin that immediately reminded me of the fishing trips with my father, the same pine-scented air, the gentle lapping of water against the shore. On our second evening, as the sun was setting over the lake, Daniel suggested a walk along the private dock. The golden light reflected off the water as he turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. Jessica Adams, he said, his voice steady but soft, you've shown me what partnership really means, supporting each other's dreams, finding joy in ordinary moments, creating safety through honesty. I want to build a life with you, face whatever comes our way together. He knelt, producing a ring box from his pocket. Will you marry me? The ring was vintage, an oval sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. It reminded me of the lake where you used to fish with your dad, he explained as he slipped it onto my finger after my tearful yes. That night, I called my parents from the cabin's landline, too excited to wait until we returned to the city. Mom answered, and I could hear her emotional reaction when I shared the news, then Dad's voice in the background asking what was happening. Jessica's engaged, she told him, then to me, your father wants to talk to you. Is this the marketing guy? Dad asked, his attempt at casualness failing to mask his excitement. The one with the glasses? Yes, Daniel, I laughed. You met him at Thanksgiving, remember? Good man, Dad said firmly. Listens more than he talks. Ask smart questions. Coming from my father, this was effusive praise. We haven't set a date yet, I told him, but I'm hoping for next June. The weather would be perfect. June, he repeated, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Your mother and I married in June. Good month for beginnings. After sharing the news with my parents, I sent Amber a text with a photo of the ring, not quite ready for a direct conversation but wanting to include her in the family announcement. Her response came hours later: congratulations. Lily's starting swim lessons next week. The abrupt subject change was so typical that I couldn't even feel disappointed. The following weeks were a whirlwind of venue hunting and preliminary planning. Daniel and I agreed on a relatively small wedding, around 80 guests, with the ceremony and reception both taking place at a restored historic estate in Connecticut. The venue had only 2 available Saturday dates the following June, and we selected June 15th, checking first with both our parents to ensure there were no conflicts. With the date secured, I called my father one evening to ask the question I'd been rehearsing in my mind since childhood. The words still caught in my throat, emotion making my voice waver. Dad, I was hoping, would you walk me down the aisle? The pause before his answer was brief but noticeable. Jessie, he said finally, his own voice thick, nothing in this world would make me prouder. I wiped away tears as he continued, been waiting for this call since the day the doctor put you in my arms. Told your mother then, I'm going to be a mess when this one gets married. You're allowed a few tears, I laughed through my own. Just don't trip us both in front of everyone. No promises, he chuckled. But I'll practice walking slowly. Got to do this right for my girl. With the venue and date set, and my father's role confirmed, the wedding began taking tangible shape. Daniel and I chose a color palette of deep blue and silver, reminiscent of moonlight on water. We selected a caterer known for farm-to-table cuisine, and found a jazz quartet for the reception. Each decision felt like another brick in the foundation of our future together. The question of Amber's role loomed large in my mind. Despite everything, she was my only sister, and excluding her from the bridal party seemed like a declaration of war I wasn't prepared to make. After discussing it with Daniel, who supported whatever would bring me peace, I called Amber directly. I'd like you to be a bridesmaid, I said after we'd exchanged obligatory pleasantries. If you want to, of course. The silence stretched so long I thought we might have been disconnected. Finally, Amber spoke. Isn't that something you usually ask in person? With some cute gift box or whatever? I closed my eyes, counting to 3 silently. I can do that if you prefer. I just thought a direct conversation might be better. Another pause. Fine. I'll do it. But I'm not wearing anything strapless. And I'll need to bring Lily, she can be the flower girl. I hadn't planned on having a flower girl, but the concession seemed minor compared to securing Amber's participation. That would be lovely, I said, genuinely warming to the idea of my niece, now 3, scattering petals down the aisle. Thank you, Amber. It means a lot to have you there. Well, we're sisters, she replied flatly, as if this biological fact was the beginning and end of any obligation between us. In the months that followed, Amber's participation in wedding planning was minimal at best. She ignored the group texts from the other bridesmaids, declined to attend the dress shopping expedition, citing Lily's dance recital, and responded to direct questions about her preferences with noncommittal shrugs. She'll come around, Mom assured me during one of our planning calls. You know your sister, she likes to act uninterested until the last minute, then she'll probably show up and surprise everyone. I wasn't counting on any positive surprises, but I held on to hope that Amber might at least refrain from creating negative ones. That hope, like so many before it regarding my sister, was about to be thoroughly crushed in a way I couldn't have anticipated, testing not only my relationship with Amber but the foundational bond I'd always trusted with my father. The official wedding invitations went out exactly 3 months before the big day, beautifully letterpressed cards nestled in deep blue envelopes. Daniel and I spent a whole weekend addressing them by hand, a labor of love that left us with ink-stained fingers and sore wrists. For family members, I included personal notes, a few lines about how much their presence would mean to us, memories we shared, or hopes for creating new ones. In Amber and Tyler's card, I wrote about looking forward to seeing Lily as our flower girl and enclosed a small sketch of the dress we'd chosen for her, age-appropriate but making her feel special as part of the bridal party. I ended with, "Despite our ups and downs, having my sister stand with me will make this day complete." 2 weeks after the invitations were mailed, Mom called on a Tuesday evening. Her voice had that carefully neutral tone she always adopted when navigating potential conflict. "Have you talked to Amber recently?" she asked after we'd covered the usual pleasantries. "Not since I sent the invitations," I replied, a small knot forming in my stomach. "Why?" Mom sighed. "She's planning a family reunion for June 15th. Sent out an email to the extended family this morning. I assumed you two had discussed this, but your father mentioned your wedding is the same day." The knot in my stomach tightened into a hard ball. "A family reunion? On my wedding day?" "Mom, that's not a coincidence." "Now Jessica," she began in the same placating tone she'd used throughout our childhood, "I'm sure there's been a miscommunication. Amber said she's been planning this for months, something about celebrating Grandpa Adams' 95th birthday. Grandpa Adams had passed away 7 years ago, making him precisely 88 years old had he still been alive. The fabrication was so transparent it would have been laughable if it weren't so deliberately hurtful." "Mom," I said carefully, "Grandpa would be 88, not 95. And Amber knew our wedding date. She's a bridesmaid." A pause. "Well, maybe she got confused with the dates. You should call her directly to sort this out." I ended the call with a promise to reach out to Amber, though I knew exactly what I would discover. Still, I tried to approach the conversation with as much benefit of the doubt as I could muster. Perhaps there had been a genuine mistake. Perhaps Amber had somehow marked the wrong date on her calendar despite months of wedding-related communications. Amber answered on the fourth ring, the sounds of a children's television show blaring in the background. "Hello? Hi Amber, it's Jessica. Do you have a minute to talk?" "I guess," she replied, making no move to lower the volume of the TV. "What's up?" "Mom mentioned you're planning a family reunion for June 15th, I said, keeping my tone deliberately light. "I wanted to check in since that's our wedding day. There must be some mix-up." The television suddenly became quieter. "Oh, is that the same day? I must have marked my calendar wrong." Her voice was flat, devoid of the surprise or concern one might expect from such a significant scheduling error. "Yes, that's our wedding day. The one you're a bridesmaid in," I reminded her, struggling to maintain composure. "We sent you an invitation 2 weeks ago." "Right," she said slowly. "Well, this is awkward. I've already sent out emails to everyone. Grandpa's birthday and all that." "Grandpa would be 88, not 95, I pointed out. And he passed away 7 years ago." "It would have been his 95th, she replied without missing a beat. "We're celebrating what would have been. As a family. To honor his memory." I pressed my fingers to my temple, feeling a headache forming. "Amber, please. This is my wedding day. Daniel and I have been planning this for months. The venue is booked, deposits paid, invitations sent." "So has my event," she countered. "I put down deposits too. People have already RSVP'd. In the 2 weeks since you saw our wedding date on the invitation we sent you?" I asked incredulously. "I've been planning this longer than that," she insisted, the lie so bold it momentarily left me speechless. When I found my voice again, I tried a different approach. "Can we talk about rescheduling your event? I'm happy to help find a new date that works for everyone. Maybe the weekend before or after? Why should I be the one to reschedule?" Amber's voice had taken on the defensive tone I knew so well. "Just because you decided to have some fancy wedding in Connecticut instead of something local where family could actually attend easily? Do you know how hard it is for people with kids to travel that far? Or older relatives?" The conversation continued in circles, Amber alternating between claiming she couldn't possibly change her plans and suggesting that my wedding was inconveniently located by design. By the time we hung up, nothing had been resolved, and the sick feeling in my stomach had only intensified. That evening, I called my father, hoping he might be able to intervene. Dad had always been the mediator in family conflicts, the voice of reason and fairness. "Dad, did Mom tell you about Amber's family reunion?" I asked after we'd chatted about his day at work. His hesitation spoke volumes. "She mentioned something about it." "It's on my wedding day," I said plainly. "The same day you're supposed to walk me down the aisle." "I know, Jesse," he sighed. "I'm sure it's just poor planning on her part. Your sister can be impulsive sometimes." "This isn't impulsive, Dad. She saw our invitation and deliberately chose the same date. She's forcing family members to choose between events." "Now, I'm sure that's not her intention," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Maybe I can talk to her, see if she'll consider moving it." I thanked him, clinging to the hope that his influence might succeed where mine had failed. But as the weeks passed, the situation only deteriorated. Aunt Susan called to apologetically inform me they'd be attending Amber's event since it was local and Uncle Jim's back problems made traveling difficult. Cousin Michael texted asking if our wedding might be live-streamed since they'd already committed to the family reunion. My mother's sister Jean left a confused voicemail asking if the events were somehow connected. Was there a morning ceremony in Ohio and an evening reception in Connecticut? Finally, I discovered through my mother that Amber had been telling relatives our wedding might be postponed due to venue issues, suggesting they should confirm with her before making travel arrangements. She'd also apparently been emphasizing that her event was more family-focused and respectful of everyone's needs, implying that my wedding was somehow exclusionary. The most painful revelation came from my cousin Kate, who forwarded an email Amber had sent to several family members. In it, Amber wrote, "Jessica deliberately chose a date that would be difficult for family with children or limited mobility. I've organized this reunion specifically to ensure our family traditions aren't sacrificed for her convenience. Dad especially shouldn't have to choose between his daughter's wedding and being with the whole family to honor his father's memory." Reading those words, the explicit attempt to manipulate my father, sent a cold wave of fury through me unlike anything I'd felt before. This wasn't just Amber being Amber, this was a calculated effort to sabotage the most important day of my life and, worse, to drive a wedge between me and my father. When I checked social media that evening, I found Amber had posted photos of Lily in a special Family Day t-shirt with the caption, "Getting ready for our big family celebration June 15th. So important to keep family close and honor our traditions. Some people forget what really matters, but not us. #FamilyFirst #Adams Reunion." The comments section was filled with relatives confirming their attendance and praising Amber for keeping family traditions alive. Several mentioned how difficult it was to choose between events but that local was easier with children or elderly parents. I closed my laptop, hands shaking with a mixture of rage and despair. Daniel found me sitting on our bedroom floor, back against the wall, tears streaming silently down my face. "She's winning," I whispered as he sat beside me. "She's actually convincing people that I'm the selfish one for having my wedding on a day she deliberately chose to conflict with it." Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Anyone who really knows you won't believe that," he assured me, though we both knew the problem ran deeper than perception. Over the next few weeks, my father's calls became less frequent. When we did speak, he seemed distracted, changing the subject whenever the wedding or Amber's event came up. My mother, caught in the middle as always, alternated between suggesting I consider changing my date, just to keep the peace, dear, and assuring me that everything would work out somehow. As June approached, the RSVPs for our wedding showed a clear pattern. Daniel's family and our friends had all confirmed attendance, while my extended family was largely declining. The handful of relatives who had chosen our wedding over Amber's reunion did so with apologetic messages about family tension and hopes that everyone can get along for both special days. But the question that kept me awake at night wasn't about distant cousins or elderly aunts. It was about the man who had promised to walk me down the aisle, the father whose support I had never questioned until now. As his calls grew shorter and less frequent, a terrible suspicion began forming in my mind, one I couldn't bear to articulate even to Daniel. Would my own father choose Amber's manufactured event over his promise to me? The answer to that question would come at a family dinner 1 month before the wedding, a confrontation that would shatter illusions I'd held my entire life and force me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and love. My mother suggested the family dinner with a forced brightness that immediately put me on edge. Just the four of us, she said over the phone. Like old times. We need to sort everything out before the big day. Daniel offered to drive me to Ohio for the weekend, concerned about my emotional state. I'll drop you at your parents' house and get a hotel room nearby, he proposed. That way you can have family time, but I'll be close if you need me. His thoughtfulness nearly brought me to tears. You'd drive 8 hours just to wait in a hotel room? I'd drive anywhere to make sure you're okay, he replied simply, and in that moment, the contrast between the family I was born into and the one I was choosing to build became startlingly clear. We arrived in Fairfield on Friday evening. My childhood home looked exactly as it always had, the blue shutters my father repainted every 3 years, the stone path leading to the front door, the porch swing where I'd spent countless summer evenings reading. Walking inside felt like stepping through a time portal, everything simultaneously familiar and strange. Mom hugged me tightly at the door. You look tired, sweetie, she murmured, brushing hair from my face in a maternal gesture that momentarily made me feel like a child again. Dad emerged from his study, his greeting warm but his eyes not quite meeting mine. There's my girl, he said, embracing me briefly. Good drive? After saying goodbye to Daniel with a promise to text him later, I followed my parents into the kitchen where Mom had prepared my favorite meal, her lasagna with garlic bread and Caesar salad. The familiar smell should have been comforting, but instead, they heightened the sense of unreality, as though we were actors in a play about a normal family dinner. Amber and Tyler arrived 20 minutes late, Lily between them clutching a new stuffed unicorn. My niece ran to hug me, her unfiltered affection a bright spot in the tense atmosphere. Aunt Jessica. I'm going to throw flowers at your party, she announced, clearly excited about her flower girl duties. That's right, sweetie, I smiled, genuinely warmed by her enthusiasm. You're going to do such a good job. Amber quickly intervened. Lily, go show Grandpa your new unicorn, she directed, steering her daughter away from me. Our eyes met briefly over Lily's head, her gaze challenging, mine steady despite the hurt. Dinner began with stilted small talk, Tyler's work on a new housing development, Mom's garden club activities, the unusually rainy spring. I answered questions about New York and shared amusing anecdotes about wedding planning, carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. Dad remained mostly silent, contributing only when directly addressed. As Mom served coffee and her homemade apple pie, I finally broached the subject we'd all been avoiding. So, I began, setting down my fork, I think we need to talk about June 15th. The tension around the table immediately thickened. Mom busied herself with rearranging dessert plates, while Dad studied his coffee cup as though it contained profound secrets. What about it? Amber asked, her tone deliberately casual. Everything set for your wedding? Everything except knowing whether my family will be there, I replied evenly. Including my father, who promised to walk me down the aisle. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair but remained silent. People have to make their own choices, Amber said with a shrug. Not everyone can travel all the way to Connecticut for a weekend. That's not what this is about, and you know it, I countered, struggling to keep my voice level. You deliberately scheduled a competing event on my wedding day after seeing our invitation. The world doesn't revolve around your wedding, Jessica, she snapped. Some of us care about family traditions and honoring our grandfather's memory. Grandpa would be horrified that you're using him as an excuse to hurt me, I said, my composure finally cracking. This has nothing to do with him and everything to do with you not being able to stand seeing me happy. Girls, please, Mom interjected, her hands fluttering anxiously. We're family. Surely we can work this out. I turned to my father, who had yet to speak. Dad? You've been awfully quiet. What do you think about all this? His eyes, when they finally met mine, were filled with a sadness that sent ice through my veins. Jesse, he began, his voice rough, I don't think it's fair to ask people to choose between two family events. I didn't ask anyone to choose, I replied, incredulous. Amber created this situation after knowing our wedding date. Dad sighed heavily. The fact is, many of our relatives have already committed to the reunion. Older folks, people with kids, it's easier for them to stay local. And what about you? I asked, though I was becoming increasingly afraid of the answer. What about your commitment to walk me down the aisle? The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Finally, Dad spoke, each word falling like a stone. I can't choose sides between my daughters. It wouldn't be right. The room tilted slightly, as though the floor had shifted beneath my chair. What are you saying? I'm saying, he continued, not quite meeting my eyes, that I think it's best if I stay here for the reunion. Support both my girls by not playing favorites. Both your girls? I repeated, my voice barely audible. Dad, this isn't about favorites. This is about a promise you made to me. About being there on the most important day of my life. You'll have Daniel, he said weakly. And your friends. It'll still be a beautiful day. Across the table, I caught the flash of satisfaction in Amber's eyes before she quickly composed her expression into one of sympathy. We could always video call during your ceremony, she suggested, her tone dripping with false concern. Something inside me broke open, years of hurt and confusion crystallizing into a single, painful moment of clarity. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks as I pushed back from the table. Video call? I choked out. You think watching my wedding on a phone screen is the same as being there? As keeping your promise to walk me down the aisle? Jesse, please try to understand, Dad pleaded, reaching for my hand across the table. This is an impossible situation. I pulled away from his touch, suddenly unable to bear it. No, Dad. This is a very simple situation. Amber created a conflict deliberately, and instead of standing up for what's right, you're taking the easy way out. Just like you always have when it comes to her. That's not fair, Mom protested. Your father loves both of you equally. Equal love doesn't mean much when it comes with unequal loyalty, I replied, standing up. I need some air. I walked out to the back porch, hands shaking as I texted Daniel, please come get me. Now. Behind me, I could hear muffled voices, Mom's distressed, Dad's defensive, Amber's placating. None of them followed me outside, a fact that spoke volumes about the family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. 20 minutes later, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. I met him at the front door, brushing past my father who had finally emerged from the dining room. Jessica, don't leave like this, Dad said, his face ashen. Let's talk more. There's nothing left to say, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. You've made your choice. So have I. The drive back to our hotel passed in a blur, my tears eventually giving way to a numb, hollow feeling. Daniel kept one hand on my knee, offering silent support while giving me space to process what had happened. In our hotel room, the full weight of the evening finally crashed over me. He's not coming to our wedding, I said aloud, the words making the reality inescapable. My own father chose her manipulation over his promise to me. Daniel held me as I sobbed, my body shaking with the force of decades of accumulated hurt. I always knew she resented me, I managed between tears. But I never thought she could turn him against me like this. He's making a mistake he'll regret for the rest of his life, Daniel said quietly. And that's on him, not you. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind replaying every moment of the confrontation, searching for what I could have said or done differently. Around 3 a.m, my phone lit up with a text from my father, I'm sorry tonight went badly. I hope you understand I'm trying to be fair to everyone. We can talk more tomorrow. The message only deepened the wound. Even now, he couldn't see that this wasn't about fairness, it was about right and wrong, about keeping promises, about standing up to manipulation instead of rewarding it. I didn't reply. The next morning, after a nearly sleepless night, another text arrived, Jesse, please call me before you head back to New York. I hate leaving things like this. Again, I couldn't bring myself to respond. Daniel and I checked out early and began the long drive home, stopping only for coffee and fuel. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, my mother called. When I didn't answer, she left a voicemail. Jessica, honey, I know you're upset. Your father is too. Maybe we could find a compromise? Perhaps you could move your wedding to another weekend? I'm sure the venue would understand family circumstances. Call me back when you can. The suggestion that I should reschedule my entire wedding to accommodate Amber's deliberately conflicting event was so absurd it would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. The request confirmed what I'd always suspected but never wanted to believe: in my family's hierarchy of needs, mine would always come last. By the time we reached our apartment in New York, I felt hollowed out, emptied of tears and left with nothing but a dull ache where my relationship with my father had once lived. As Daniel unpacked our overnight bags, I sat at our kitchen counter and finally wrote a response to my father. Dad, I've always understood that navigating between Amber and me was difficult. What I didn't understand until now was that when forced to make a real choice, you would choose peace with her over your promise to me. I won't be calling before we head back to New York. We're already home. I need time to process this betrayal before I can talk to you again. I hesitated over the word betrayal, knowing it would hurt him, then decided to leave it. Sometimes the truth was painful, and this was a pain he had earned through his choices. I hit send, then turned off my phone, unwilling to face any immediate response. That night, lying beside Daniel in our darkened bedroom, I whispered the question that had been haunting me since dinner: what kind of wedding will it be without my father there? Daniel pulled me closer. It will be the beginning of our life together, surrounded by people who choose to support us without conditions. It won't be what you imagined, but it will still be beautiful because it will be honest. His words offered a small measure of comfort, but as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the image of walking down the aisle alone, my father's absence a visible wound for everyone to see. The path forward seemed suddenly unclear, my lifelong certainties about family and belonging shattered beyond easy repair. The week following the confrontation with my family was the darkest I'd ever experienced. I moved through my days like a sleepwalker, going through the motions at work, forcing smiles during wedding vendor meetings, then coming home to cry in the shower where Daniel couldn't hear me. The thought of walking down the aisle without my father left me with a physical ache, as though something had been carved out of my chest. Daniel gave me space while ensuring I was never truly alone, bringing home my favorite takeout, fielding calls from concerned friends, and simply holding me on the nights when sleep wouldn't come. On the third evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the city lights flicker to life, he finally broached the subject we'd been avoiding. "Do you want to postpone the wedding?" he asked gently. "We could take some time, let things settle with your family." The question made me pause. Did I want to postpone? The thought had certainly crossed my mind, especially after my mother's suggestion. But as I considered it seriously for the first time, I felt an unexpected clarity cutting through the fog of hurt. "No," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "That's exactly what Amber wants, to disrupt our plans, to make me change my life to accommodate her games. I'm not doing it." Daniel nodded, a small smile forming. "Okay then. We're getting married on June 15th as planned. But how do I walk down the aisle? Who gives me away?" The practical questions that had been haunting me tumbled out. "Who says anyone has to give you away?" Daniel countered. "You're not property to be handed from one man to another. You could walk alone, proud and independent. Or we could walk in together, starting our journey side by side from the very beginning." His suggestions made sense logically, but emotionally, I still felt the absence of what I'd always imagined. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "But you're right, we're not changing our date." The following day, I received an unexpected call from Daniel's mother, Grace. She and I had always gotten along well, but we weren't particularly close, so her name on my caller ID was surprising. "Jessica," she began without preamble, "Daniel told me what happened with your father." I hope you don't mind. Of course not, I assured her, though I felt a flush of embarrassment at my family drama being shared. I went through something similar when I married Daniel's father, she continued. My brother refused to attend because he disapproved of Jack's family background. I was devastated. What did you do? I asked, suddenly hungry for guidance from someone who had walked this path before me. I cried for days, she admitted. Then my aunt, not even a blood relative, but the woman who had been more of a mother to me than my own, said something I've never forgotten. Weddings reveal who truly celebrates your happiness and who merely tolerates it when convenient. The wisdom of those words resonated deeply. That's actually incredibly helpful, I said, feeling the first genuine smile in days form on my lips. The people who show up for you on your wedding day are making a statement about who they intend to be in your marriage, Grace continued. Sometimes that's family, sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's people you never expected. But it's always the right people, even when it hurts. After we hung up, I sat with her words, turning them over in my mind. The right people. Not necessarily the expected ones, but the ones who chose to celebrate our happiness without conditions or manipulations. That evening, I received a text from my childhood best friend Mia, who had already confirmed she'd be attending the wedding with her husband. Heard about your dad from your mom. I'm so sorry, Jess. Call me if you want to talk. I did call, and our conversation stretched late into the night. Mia had been there through all the years of Amber's jealousy, had witnessed the dynamic from outside the family with clearer eyes than mine. You know, she said thoughtfully after I'd recounted the recent events, my dad always had a soft spot for you. He used to say you were the daughter he never had. Mia's father, Thomas Bradley, had indeed been a constant presence in my youth, coaching our soccer team, helping with science projects, attending my high school graduation when my own family had been caught in a drama surrounding Amber's sudden breakup with her then boyfriend. He had treated me with the same affection and attention he showed Mia, never making me feel like an add-on or an obligation. I was thinking, Mia continued hesitantly, if you wanted. I mean, I know it's not the same, but my dad would be honored to walk you down the aisle. If you wanted that. The offer brought fresh tears, but these felt different from the ones I'd been shedding all week, cleansing rather than depleting. Do you think he would? I asked, voice wavering. Are you kidding? He'd probably rent a tux tomorrow if I told him. He always said you were going places, Jess. He'd be proud to stand with you. The next day, I called Thomas myself. His warm, booming voice brought back memories of carpools to soccer practice and backyard barbecues, of someone who had shown up for me consistently without ever being obligated to do so. Jessica Adams, he exclaimed. Mia told me about your upcoming wedding. Congratulations, kiddo. Thank you, I replied, suddenly nervous. Mia might have mentioned, there's been some family complications. She filled me in, he said, his tone gentler. I'm sorry you're going through that. Family should be there for the big moments. That's actually why I'm calling, I continued, gathering my courage. I was wondering if you might consider, if you'd be willing to walk me down the aisle? It would mean so much to have someone who's known me since I was little, someone who's always been kind to me. The brief silence that followed felt endless, until I realized Thomas was collecting himself. Jessica, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, I would be honored beyond words. Truly honored. That conversation marked a turning point. Something shifted inside me, not healing completely, but beginning to scab over, the acute pain transforming into something I could carry without being crushed by it. I began to reimagine our wedding not as a compromised version of my original vision, but as something new and perhaps more meaningful, a celebration surrounded exclusively by people who truly wished us well. At work, my team surprised me with lunch and practical offers of help, everything from addressing last-minute invitations to assembling welcome bags for out-of-town guests. My friend Zoe, a graphic designer, offered to create beautiful signage for the reception. Another colleague volunteered her teenage daughter to help coordinate the guest book and gifts. Meanwhile, Daniel had been quietly handling logistical changes, updating our seating chart and informing our vendors of the adjusted family situation. Less drama for the photographer to navigate, he joked gently one evening, earning a genuine laugh from me for the first time in days. That weekend, I found myself sitting in a therapist's office, having taken up a friend's recommendation for a professional to help process everything before the wedding. Dr. Levine, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, listened to my story without interruption. "What strikes me," she said when I'd finished, "is not that your sister orchestrated this situation, her pattern of behavior seems well established, but that you're surprised by your father's response." Her observation caught me off guard. "I guess I always thought when it really mattered, he'd stand up for what's right. And now you know he won't," she said simply. "That's painful, but it's also information you can use to adjust your expectations and protect yourself going forward." We spent the hour exploring how I might approach the wedding and future family interactions with appropriate boundaries. "The goal isn't to stop loving your father," Dr. Levine explained, "but to love him with clear eyes about who he actually is, not who you wish he could be." I left the session with a homework assignment, to write a letter to my father expressing everything I felt, with no intention of sending it. That evening, I sat at our dining table and poured years of hurt, confusion, and dashed hopes onto paper. By the final page, my hand was cramping and my cheeks were wet, but I felt lighter somehow, as though naming the pain had diminished its power. The next morning, I did something I'd been avoiding. I posted a simple statement on social media. "Due to some family circumstances, there have been changes to our wedding plans. The date and venue remain the same, and we're looking forward to celebrating with those who can join us. For anyone confused by conflicting information, please feel free to contact me directly. With love, Jessica and Daniel." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Several relatives who had declined our invitation messaged to apologize and change their RSVP. My cousins Kate and Michael called to say they'd be driving to Connecticut directly after making a brief appearance at Amber's event. Even my great-aunt Edith, whom I'd assumed would stay in Ohio given her age, emailed that she'd booked a flight because some things are worth the trouble. Each message reinforced what Daniel's mother had told me: the right people would show up, even if they weren't all the people I'd expected. And as our revised guest list took shape, I realized our wedding would still be filled with love and support, perhaps even more genuine for having been chosen rather than assumed. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a text message from my mother: "I'll be at your wedding, Jessica. With or without your father." Some things a mother doesn't miss. It was the first time in my memory that my mother had chosen a side in any conflict involving Amber, and though it was a small step, it felt monumental. I called her immediately, and our conversation, while tearful on both ends, began the process of repairing at least one fractured family relationship. The night before we left for Connecticut, I stood in our bedroom looking at my wedding dress hanging on the closet door. The ivory lace and delicate beading caught the light, creating tiny prisms on the wall. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Having second thoughts?" he asked softly. "No," I replied truthfully. "Actually, I was just thinking that despite everything, I'm excited for our wedding." "Really excited?" He kissed my temple. "That's my girl. The one who doesn't let anyone dim her light for long." As we packed the final items for our wedding weekend, I felt a sense of peace that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The path to the altar wouldn't look like I'd always imagined, but I would walk it surrounded by genuine love and support. And waiting at the end would be Daniel, the person who had shown me what unconditional love actually looked like in practice, not just in theory. My father's absence would be felt, a wound not yet healed. But I was beginning to understand that some absences make space for unexpected presences, and sometimes the family we build matters more than the one we're born into. With that thought held close, I closed our suitcases and prepared to step into the next chapter of our lives together. The morning of June 15th dawned with perfect blue skies over the Connecticut countryside. I woke early in my suite at the historic estate where we'd be married, sunlight streaming through lace curtains onto the antique four-poster bed. For a moment, I lay still, allowing the realization to wash over me: today I would become Daniel's wife. My bridesmaids arrived shortly after 8, carrying coffee and breakfast pastries, their excitement filling the room with chatter and laughter. As the makeup artist began working her magic and the hairstylist arranged my dark hair into loose curls with tiny white flowers woven throughout, I found myself surprisingly calm. Only once, when the photographer was capturing getting ready moments, did I feel a sharp pang of loss. There, among the detail shots of my shoes, jewelry, and dress, was an empty wooden chair where my father should have been sitting for a first look. The photographer, sensing my sudden shift in mood, gently suggested we move to another setting. "Let's get some shots of you with your bridesmaids on the veranda," she proposed, smoothly redirecting everyone's attention. "The lighting is perfect right now." Around 11, there was a soft knock at the door. My mother entered, looking elegant in a silver blue dress that complemented our wedding colors. Her eyes widened at the sight of me in my wedding gown, one hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Jessica," she breathed. "You're absolutely beautiful." We embraced carefully to avoid disturbing my hair and makeup, and I inhaled the familiar scent of her perfume, the same one she'd worn throughout my childhood. "I'm so sorry about everything," she whispered against my ear. "Your father," she began, then stopped herself. "No, today isn't about that. Today is about you and Daniel, and I'm so happy to be here." "Thank you for coming, Mom," I replied, genuinely grateful for her presence despite the complicated emotions it stirred. "It means a lot." "He made the wrong choice," she said suddenly, pulling back to look me in the eyes. "I want you to know that I told him so. We've never really disagreed about the girls before, but on this, we do." Her words, this small act of standing up for what was right rather than what was easiest, felt like a precious gift. I squeezed her hands, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. "Now," she said briskly, wiping at her eyes, "something old, something new?" Together with my bridesmaids, we completed the tradition. Something old, my grandmother's pearl earrings. Something new, my wedding dress. Something borrowed, a delicate bracelet from Mia. Something blue, a tiny sapphire pin for my bouquet, a surprise from Daniel that morning to match the lake where I proposed. As the ceremony time approached, Thomas Bradley arrived at my suite, handsome in a classic black tuxedo. Seeing him, so eager to stand beside me on this day, brought fresh tears that I quickly blinked away to save my makeup. "You look absolutely radiant," he said, his voice warm with affection. "I brought you something." From his pocket, he produced a small silver compass on a chain. "I gave one to Mia when she got married too. It's kind of a Bradley tradition," he explained. "A reminder that no matter where life takes you, you always have the wisdom inside to find your true north." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, including me in his family tradition when my own had fallen short, left me momentarily speechless. I wrapped my arms around him in a grateful hug. "Thank you for doing this," I said finally. "For being here when—" "Hey now," he interrupted gently. "It's my privilege. Always has been, from the first time you showed up at our house with Mia in 2nd grade. Some people come into our lives and just belong there, no explanation needed." At 1:30, the string quartet began playing Canon in D, signaling the start of the procession. From my position just inside the estate's garden doors, I watched as Daniel's groomsmen escorted the bridesmaids down the aisle, followed by Lily, looking angelic in her flower girl dress, earnestly dropping rose petals in clumps rather than the graceful scatter we'd practiced. And then it was our turn. Thomas offered his arm, his steady presence grounding me as the wedding coordinator opened the doors fully. The assembled guests rose, turning to watch our entrance, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, I scanned the crowd instinctively for my father's face before remembering he wouldn't be there. Instead, I found Daniel waiting at the altar, his expression so full of love and certainty that everything else faded away. With Thomas by my side, I began the walk toward my future husband, each step feeling more right than the last. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. We had written our own vows, and Daniel's voice remained steady as he promised to build a life with me based on honesty, respect, and unwavering support. When my turn came, I was surprised to find my own voice clear and strong as I pledged my love and partnership. "Daniel," I said, looking into his eyes, "you've taught me what real support looks like, not conditional, not convenient, but constant and true. I promise to bring that same steadfastness to our marriage every day." As we exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, the applause from our guests seemed to wash away the last lingering shadows of family drama. We practically danced back down the aisle, hand in hand, husband and wife at last. The reception that followed was everything we'd hoped for, intimate yet joyful, elegant without being stuffy. We dined under a canopy of string lights in the estate's garden, danced our first dance to Ella Fitzgerald's At Last, and cut a cake adorned with sugar flowers that matched my bouquet. Throughout the evening, I was continuously surprised by how complete everything felt, despite the notable absences. My mother danced with Daniel during the parent dances, while Thomas stepped in for what would have been the father-daughter dance, earning a standing ovation that left us both misty-eyed. Cousins Kate and Michael made good on their promise, arriving just before dinner was served, full of apologies for missing the ceremony and thinly veiled reports about Amber's event, apparently sparsely attended and lacking the festive atmosphere she'd promised. "Most people just stopped by briefly to be polite," Kate whispered as we hugged hello. It was obvious what she was doing, and nobody appreciated being manipulated. As the night drew to a close, Daniel and I made our exit through an archway of sparklers held by our cheering friends and family, climbing into a vintage car that would take us to our hotel before we left for our honeymoon in Greece the following day. "Mrs. Foster," Daniel said once we were alone in the back seat, testing the name on his tongue. "How does it feel?" "Perfect," I replied honestly, leaning my head on his shoulder. Despite everything, today was perfect. The week after our return from Greece, still floating on post-wedding bliss, I finally checked the backlog of messages on my phone. Among them was a text from my father sent the morning after our wedding. "I saw the photos your mother shared. You looked beautiful, Jessie. I made a terrible mistake. Call when you're ready." I stared at the message for a long time, conflicting emotions washing through me. Part of me wanted to delete it unanswered. Another part wanted to respond with all the hurt and anger I still carried. In the end, I simply set the phone aside, not yet ready to engage. From my mother, I learned that Amber's family reunion had indeed been poorly attended. Several relatives had made brief appearances before claiming other commitments, and others had declined entirely once they understood the circumstances. The event she'd designed to overshadow my wedding had instead highlighted the transparent nature of her jealousy. "Your father is miserable," Mom reported during one of our calls. "He knows he chose wrong, but he's not sure how to make it right." "That's for him to figure out," I replied, no longer willing to shoulder the responsibility for healing family rifts I hadn't created. Over the following months, Daniel and I settled into married life, finding joy in the ordinary rhythms of sharing our days and building our future together. We bought our first home, a brownstone with a small garden that needed renovation but had good bones, as the realtor put it. The process of making it ours became a metaphor for our marriage: thoughtful planning, occasional disagreements resolved through communication, and growing excitement as we saw our vision take shape. 6 months after the wedding, I received a letter, not a text or email, but an actual handwritten letter, from my father. Inside was a 5-page confession of regret, acknowledging his failure to stand up to Amber's manipulation throughout our lives and especially regarding the wedding. He didn't ask for forgiveness or even a response, he simply wanted me to know he recognized the harm he'd caused. After reading it twice, I called him. Our conversation was awkward at first, both of us navigating unfamiliar emotional territory, but gradually we found our way to honesty. "I've spent months thinking about why I made the choice I did," he said, his voice heavy with remorse. "The truth is, it was easier to disappoint you because I knew you would eventually forgive me. Amber would have made everyone's life hell for years if I'd chosen your wedding over her event." "That doesn't make it right," I replied quietly. "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "I took advantage of your good nature, your resilience. I betrayed your trust because I knew you were strong enough to handle it, while Amber isn't. And that was deeply unfair to you." His insight, painful as it was to hear articulated, helped me understand the dynamic that had shaped our family for decades. The stronger child often receives less protection, less consideration, precisely because of their strength. It wasn't fair, but naming it helped me begin to process it. "I'd like to see you," he said before we ended the call. "When you're ready." No pressure. A month later, I invited him to visit our new home. The reunion was tentative, both of us careful with our words and actions, but underneath the caution was a genuine desire to rebuild on more honest ground. Dad brought a housewarming gift, a framed photo of the two of us from one of our long-ago fishing trips, my small hand proudly holding up a sunfish, his arm around my shoulders. "I thought maybe this could go somewhere in your new place," he said hesitantly. "A reminder of good times." I found a spot for it in our study, not hidden away, but not in the main living areas either. A place that acknowledged our history without pretending the recent past hadn't happened. As for Amber, our relationship remained distant but less actively hostile. The wedding drama had exposed her tactics too clearly for her to continue using them effectively within the family. When we did interact at holidays or family events, there was a new wariness in how others observed our exchanges, a protective bubble that formed around me where once I'd been expected to simply absorb her barbs. A year after our wedding, Daniel and I hosted a small anniversary gathering at our newly renovated home. My father attended, as did my mother, several close friends, and even a few relatives who had chosen Amber's event the year before and wanted to make amends. As we toasted with champagne in our garden, I looked around at the faces of people who had chosen, some belatedly, but sincerely, to celebrate our happiness. The journey to this moment had been painful in ways I never expected, but it had also brought clarity about what truly constitutes family, not just blood or legal ties, but actions that consistently demonstrate love, respect, and support. "To chosen family," Daniel said, raising his glass to join mine. "And to new beginnings." The glasses clinked, catching the late afternoon sun in a prism of light that seemed to symbolize the hard-won wisdom of the past year. Sometimes the brightest clarity comes only after passing through darkness. And sometimes, the family we build around us proves stronger and truer than the one we're born into. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family members who couldn't celebrate your happiness? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and growth. Remember to share with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening to my story, and may your own path be filled with people who truly celebrate your joy.